We're live.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Free Assange Vigil, week 55. My name is Steve Boykin, and I am joined this morning by my co-host Andrew Smith. We will introduce our guest Deepa Driver here in a moment, but first let's run through some numbers. Today marks 3,518 days of illegal and arbitrary detention for Julian Assange. 471 days since the WikiLeaks founder was trafficked from the Ecuadorian embassy after being sold to the United Kingdom for a $4.2 billion IMF loan. 50 days remain until the second phase of Julian's show trial and rendition hearing. 1,149 days of incarceration for Reality Winner. She is the longest incarcerated whistleblower under the Espionage Act in history. On a positive note, we have 134 days of freedom for Chelsea Manning, who is live streaming on Twitch Thursday through Sunday from, I believe, 4 p.m. to 8 p.m. Pacific, or 7 to 11 on the East Coast. You guys, Action for Assange is trying to get back to Washington, D.C. We are crowdfunding for that. I am very, very happy to announce that that despite record high unemployment in the U.S. And all of the panic that has been ensuing with COVID-19 and everything else on top of that, we are a little bit over halfway to our goal. So I want to thank you guys so very much for helping to make that possible. If you can and you haven't yet, or you have and you feel like doing it again, please donate. And if you can't, we totally understand for the reasons that I just mentioned and more, but please help us share that link. I am going to, at this point, kick it over to Andrew, who will discuss our call to action for the week.
Yeah, so each week, as everybody knows, we put out different calls to action. Last week, we were trying to promote Wise Up Action, so we just put their website up there. This week, we have actually an open letter that's on Wise Up Action, and this is specifically about the abuses or the conflicts of interest around Judge Arbuthnot, who is the magistrate overseeing Julian's entire case, while it is Vanessa Baraster that sits on the bench. So I'm going to put that letter link into chat there just for everybody to go and sign if you could. And then the other one, too, this is something that the DEA campaign just recently launched this week. And it's a tool that you can use if you're over in the UK to contact your PM. If you're good with zip codes, you can probably figure out a way to contact ones even if they're not your PM.
Your MP.
MP, sorry, not PM. But either way, I just put that into chat for everybody too, and that's over on the Don't Extradite Assange campaign's website. But with us today, actually, we have one of our favorite people, Deepa Driver. She relentlessly hosts events across the UK for Julian. Since COVID kicked off, she has moved into an online platform with her Free the Truth events as well as others. So how are you today, Deepa?
I'm great, thank you, Andrew. Thank you very much for allowing me to participate in this. It's amazing to see how you managed to keep the vigil going and how you come together and allow and make this discussion possible for everybody. So it's great to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
No problem. Thank you again for joining us. So tomorrow you actually have a really special event going on. So I wanted to start off by opening the floor to you to talk about what we have in plan for tomorrow.
Thanks. So tomorrow at 1 o'clock British Summer Time, that should be about, I think, 5 hours prior for you. Is that about 7 o'clock for you? We're having, no, 8 o'clock, sorry. 8 o'clock in the morning for those in the US. There is an event with 3 very interesting people. Jeffrey Robertson QC used to be Julian's main defense lawyer, and now he's part of the wider team that Gareth Pierce presides over. He's not just a very good barrister, he's He's also very interested in history. He's written an interesting book on Charles I and how Winston Churchill used that to discuss, to hold people to account for crimes against the people after the Second World War. He's a very eloquent speaker, as most defense barristers are. And in addition, we have somebody who's been a wonderful, wonderful champion of Julian, and one of the few people who had the courage to stand up for Julian in the British Parliament and publicly several times, Chris Williamson, the former MP. Chris is putting together a grassroots resistance movement, so it'd be very interesting to hear from him about how resistance movements can be shaped. And lastly, we have Helen Mercer. Helen's the one who actually gave me this idea, so credit to her and to Emmy at the Julian Assange Defence Committee, or Committee to Defend Julian Assange, as it is now called, the JADC. Last week we had a memorial event that was hosted every year, and where a lot of trade unionists gather to commemorate the toll puddle martyrs who were shipped off and whose trade union rights were infringed. And it's really there that you see they're seen as the birthplace, or the toll puddle struggle is seen as the birthplace of the trade union movement. So Helen's written a very interesting article comparing and contrasting the smearing, the lying, the use of lawfare as it was used against the toll puddle martyrs, and then comparing that to what's happening to Julian today. So she's got an interesting historical perspective. I think what will be really interesting is also to quiz Jeffrey a little bit about how a lot of what is happening with Julian is to provide this veneer of due process about the law. I mean, I speak to a lot of lawyers, and I don't know about you, but when I speak to lawyers, they all say, oh, but shouldn't he be punished for skipping bail? And, oh, but didn't he do this or didn't he do that? Without thinking about what the purpose of the law is and the fundamental idea that anybody who's accused of a crime should be able to defend themselves. They shouldn't be spied upon and then their tapes sent off to the CIA. They shouldn't be put in a prison without charge. They shouldn't be psychologically tortured. And most importantly, what is a journalist, a peace-loving man, somebody who's brought to light war crimes rather than committed them, doing in Belmarsh maximum security prison, when Tony Blair, Hillary Clinton, Bush, Obama, all these people are walking around free, Tony Blair's running a peace foundation, for Christ's sake. I mean, it's like an upside down world.
I have frequently said that we live in a cartoon, Deepa, and every day something happens that bears that out just a little bit more. I'm stunned by the level of, or the lack of curiosity on the part of the international legal community where this is concerned, because I've heard similar things like, oh, well, he should be punished for jumping bail. Well, he was. He served the longest sentence passed in UK history for doing so. Now he's a remand prisoner. There's no way you can argue that he is anything but a political prisoner. And we've got a letter from the International Barristers organization, but the signatories on it are much fewer and further between than I would have thought. I know that at least here in the States, we have a ton of, I guess you could call them activist lawyers, but they're nowhere to be seen regarding Julian Assange. And it's mind-numbing, because whatever your activism is, it doesn't stand a chance of success without free press, without getting outside of the social or the news aggregators that social media has become. And our ability to communicate freely across international lines, partisan lines, whatever, depends on our ability to maintain a free press.
And the other thing it allows too is it sets a public precedent that people can be treated this way in legal situations, that process can be used as punishment. And so if you're someone who, for any reason, would be a activist or political dissident, whether you're fighting for a better healthcare system, whether you're fighting to end wars or fighting to end the global institution of fascism, they are allowed to target you in this way. It is public now that they will put people in special administrative measures, when before that was the most well-kept secret in the US prison systems, where the UK will hold someone on remand during a pandemic whose crime is literally telling people the truth. That's going to allow internationally governments to get away with so much more and not be called out by other governments or institutions, because this form of torture will be standardized if it's not already.
Can I go back to something you said earlier, which I think Steve said this about who's only, about lawyers talking about bail. What really irritates me is when, say, a Russian dissident or a Chinese dissident crosses over and seeks asylum in an embassy. We look at that as asylum. But when a man who's running for his life from the world's greatest rogue state, i.e. America, and 4 other rogue states, Australia, Britain, Ecuador, and Sweden, he's treated as though he's jumping bail by people who should really be caring about how the rule of law is upheld. I think the other thing I wanted to say, when you mentioned about the Ibari letter, from the international lawyers, I think it was about 6 months ago, maybe, probably less than that. Life seems to just, time seems to expand and contract during this pandemic when you're stuck indoors. But
we're all stuck in a Philip K. Dick novel now.
I don't know what that is.
Oh, okay. It's worth looking into. I promise you'll be highly entertained and thoroughly frightened.
I go away educated every single time. I remember last time I was on here, Commander Rex was on here, and it just amazed me the way his mind works. Anyway, coming back to the jurist letter, what was really interesting to me was a number of people and a number of very activist lawyers in the US signed the letter, and that included Nancy Hollander, Marjorie Cohn. I was just trying to pull up the list of names of some of the lawyers from the US. So amazing lawyers, and in France, in Australia. But what was really, really embarrassing was that very few lawyers in the UK were willing to put their name to the letter. And that kind of, to some extent, I felt better about the fact that although they didn't sign that letter, they signed another letter, another statement put out by the Haldane Society of Socialist Lawyers. And you'd think a group of socialist lawyers, and I'm now a member of the Haldane Society as well, but you'd think a group of socialist lawyers would get behind this and be kicking at the door and saying this is completely a travesty. But one thing that surprised me about talking to them was learning that this idea of having, say, people in custody 23 hours a day, and as Julian has been during lockdown, where he hasn't been able to talk to his lawyers, he hasn't been able to talk to his family, and he's actually locked down now for 23 hours a day. This kind of breach of basic human rights has now become so prevalent across the justice system in Britain that people see it happening to Julian and they kind of say, oh yeah, but it happens to everybody else. But it's wrong. Every single time it happens to everybody else too. And that's one thing that really upsets me about the legal system, that I guess when you're part of that system and you've been fighting against it, as many of these good socialist lawyers have been doing, they find it's almost as if they've bought into the narrative that this system is so bad and you can't do anything about it. And that's what gives me hope when I come to vigils like this, that people actually believe we can change this, we can talk about it, we can we can kick at the door and break it down. And the other thing which I wanted to pick on was your idea of process used as punishment. And I think that's a beautiful way of expressing it, because that's exactly what's happening to Julian, and that's partly what we're trying to bring out in the session tomorrow. Julian does not have to be a martyr for our cause of free speech. We do not want him to suffer in order for this to come out. And I suspect some of you will have seen John Firth's film, Not in Our Name, a few weeks ago. And it was very interesting to see how so many experts were saying he is being tortured. And yet, again, everybody seems to say, oh, yeah, he's being tortured, and move on. So I'm really, it upsets me, it depresses me, but it also makes me think that we have to do better and we have to come together. Sorry, waffled on a bit.
Oh no, waffle away. Consider us Belgium here. Just get your waffles on. It's fine. I think that one of the things that we've done, not setting out to do it, but just as a course of, in the course of holding these vigils now for 55 consecutive weeks, is we're trying to destigmatize talking about the horrific nature of these Five Eyes countries and the reality that we don't have governments that run intelligence agencies. We have intelligence agencies that run governments. And if we're successful in destigmatizing, just simply discussing it, then we can have these conversations anywhere. We can have them while people are gathered in protest for a completely separate issue, and be able to make the connection that your free speech and Julian Assange's life are intertwined. The future of investigative journalism is inherently intertwined with activism in general. And when we can do that, that's when we're going to start to see cooperation and cohesion on an international level, where everybody who has a cause thinks their cause is the most important cause. And if we can kind of decouple that, not necessarily selfish idealism, but that, I guess, purity of mindset, I think, is what I'm going for. Then we can really start to see ideas proliferate that don't have a label attached to them or a branding attached to them. Do you know what I mean? It's early still. I've only had one cup of coffee. I'm not sure if all cylinders are firing.
You're fine, Steve. I was just thinking in that regard, if you look at environmental activists working in the Amazon, working elsewhere in the world, what WikiLeaks has done in allowing them to whistleblow on corporate criminality, on state criminality, is humongous. If the Greta Thunbergs of this world were incarcerated in Belmarsh prison for revealing the truth about what's happening with our environment, let's say Greta Thunberg got this massive cache of data and knew what to do with it, because, young, wonderful person probably knows how to use the internet. But if she were to disclose it, what we're saying is we're going to jail her, because, you can call anything classified. You can be criminal. And then once you call it classified, and even if you perform a criminal act, it cannot be released. And it is important that environmental activists, political activists, NHS campaigners, people who are protecting LGBT rights, people who are investigating other kinds of crimes, recognize that this is about them too, and this is about their whistleblowers too. It's not just about war crimes. The range of things that WikiLeaks has released is humongous. It's in terms of, for people in Europe, it released information about TTIP, this transatlantic ability to have companies sue governments in secret courts. Yeah. These are all important things that people need to know about. And so I remember Patrick Coburn wrote, I encourage people to read this article by Patrick Coburn on the London Review of Books website. On that website, he's written this very interesting article, and he spoke about it at an event, and he was saying what Julian released in terms of the information was not things that people didn't know. People on the ground in Iraq and Afghanistan, the real investigative journalists, knew about it, but they had no proof. They had no evidence. And what Chelsea and Julian and Snowden and others have done is allowed for that information to be out in the public domain in a way in which the information can be corroborated and cannot be hidden behind behind lies and fraud. And this is what the Reuters head of bureau in Baghdad said as well, that he was even shown the video of the two Reuters journalists being gunned down, but he was shown an edited version, which didn't tell him what was really going on. And he went in there, quite naive in some ways, I would think, thinking that he had to build relationships with these people so that they would disclose information to him. He didn't want to have an adversarial relationship like his predecessors had had. And when he came out of this process and he learned what had really gone on, he was suicidal. He was confined to an institution several times because he couldn't deal with the fact that he had been taken in so badly, and he had blamed the people who had, the two Reuters journalists for what happened to them. And this is what we have to remember, that nobody would be able to corroborate any of the crimes that took place in Iraq and Afghanistan without WikiLeaks.
And the crimes that are still happening in Iraq and Afghanistan are still being exposed. On top of all of it, we have a friend of the show, David McBride, has come on a couple times to talk about what he's exposed and his situation and the state of his case over in Australia. And I know a lot of people know, but just in case people don't, David McBride essentially revealed war crimes in Iraq and Afghanistan that were associated with essentially the political climate, where when they realized that they needed a boost in the polls to get whatever neoliberal or neoconservative they needed elected, they would send Australian troops to die in Afghanistan. And David Bride exposed that. And in exposing that, David Bride inadvertently showed the world the state of the Australian press, because a lot of people then realized, wow, Australia doesn't have a Bill of Rights and something that the US would consider a First Amendment, because ABC News Studios got raided out there. And it was essentially a show of power by the Australian government to then prosecute journalists and whistleblowers, because they have the literal legal authority in Australia to rewrite history in newsrooms and on news websites that don't fall in line with the government narrative. So there's still heroes out there that are working tirelessly and at great self-detriment to expose this. And it's not just here in the US, because these wars are global. It's something that every Western nation around the world has committed atrocities in the name of building an oil empire, essentially.
Well, and an all-encompassing surveillance state on top of that oil empire. Because once you've gone to the trouble of exploiting a native population to claim their natural resources, you then need to keep tabs on that native population that you've been committing genocide in and exploiting and basically practicing escalatio for the better part of anywhere from 200 to 200 years. And why it's so hard to communicate to people that a surveillance state is a bad idea is a testament to how well the surveillance state is working, I think.
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting. I was speaking to a member of the family the other day, and I think my husband and I often try out our ideas on them, because they're your typical, I would say, ordinary person, the kind of person who represents Joe Public, I guess, in some ways. Not because, they for example, when I asked them, I asked the woman in this group, I was saying to her, are you really keen on having these listening devices like Alexa in your in your house. You've got young children, and how do you feel about, and I sent her some information, as you do. And her thing was, well, I don't do anything wrong. So why should I worry if they're spying on me? They won't hear anything. And you think, actually, you don't know how much data they're harvesting and how much they're driving how you're behaving, whether it's how you shop online or how they're using that, and how your teenage child will is thinking about what they're planning to do and how much they're. And this is the thing, you're absolutely right. They've made it absolutely banal that to expect that you will be surveilled, to think that you will only, and to believe that you will only get into trouble if you do something wrong. And
it depends on
neither of those. Sorry.
I was just going to say, it depends on the scope of what wrong is, because like Susie Dawson has done some absolutely amazing work exposing what intelligence communities do. And it's not whether you're doing something right or wrong. It's if there's a profit motive to gather your information and use it in a way that it's exploitive against you. In some cases, that profit motive is directed against activists and journalists because they try to interrupt the standard flow of government and corporate process. But it's been shown that it's been used on earthquake victims, that it's been used on insurance claimants. And it's so that way, even if you're not doing anything wrong, they can still gather this information, sell it to multinational corporations that you may or may not be engaged in litigation with for whatever reason, whether it's personal injury or what have you, and use that information against you, where they can say, no, all of our records indicate that it happened this different way, when that may not be reality, but it could just be what is reflected with publicly available data.
There's also the element that Deepa touched on there, that this data mining is being assembled and then restructured in an element of predictive programming, where you are being taught how to be a good consumer or how to be a better consumer. You're being taught how to be a more a better supplicant to the state. And that's something that I think, or at least when I put it to people, because Deepa, I've had the same conversations with people that are like, well, I'm not doing anything wrong. Why should I worry about whether or not I'm being surveilled? And it's this isn't a matter of right and wrong. This is a matter of, should the government and corporations be allowed to dictate your thoughts back to you in terms of product, I guess, or on how to make you a better consumer. And it's just, I've had a little bit of success with that when I can explain it better. I'm doing a poor job of explaining it right now.
Well, actually, sorry, I don't think you're doing a poor job. I think your answer's spot on. I think I wanted to make two related points. One, there's I'm just trying to remember the name of the author, but there's a fantastic book where Kathy something about, it's about modeling, mathematical modeling, and how it's used, ranging from whether you get health insurance through to credit scoring you based on, and then pricing products, say, through online websites differently based on your on the conversations you've had, on the kinds of sites you go to, and actually charging you more for things, which I think resonates better with people. I did want to come back to this idea of whether everybody at in the national security state is actually thinking this way. And I was at a press conference a couple of days ago, maybe it was yesterday, with Bill Binney. He was talking about the safeguards they tried to put in. And initially he was saying, when I thought this was quite funny, he was saying one of the reasons they wanted to put these safeguards in terms of protecting and not releasing all the information in terms of contacts and when they were surveilling people, was because they were worried that the dodgy deals they had between your senators and corporations would start to be revealed through all this surveillance. And over time, what happened was those safeguards which he had built in were taken away. And it is through the removal of these safeguards that actually we come to a position where everybody everywhere is being targeted, which means that, and this is what is crucial, which is that in Britain right now, they are trying to criminalize whistleblowing. They're trying to criminalize the journalists who receive information arising from whistleblowing. How else are you going to know about the crimes that your state commits in your name? And how else are you going to hold the Boris Johnsons of this world, the people who cause huge amounts of catastrophe everywhere in the world, to account, unless you have somebody with principles who feels able to reveal information, even if they do it secretly? And very few people, for example, in COVID, we know there is so much information floating about from different kinds of experts that it's very hard to work out what's the truth and what's wrong. And it is really important that we allow those who really understand what's going on with the world to tell us about it. And if they feel that they will be surveilled and their families will be destroyed and their lives will be destroyed, as has happened with John Kiriakou, as has happened with Catherine Gunn, as has happened with Julian Assange, he's got 2 young children. The ages between 0 and 4 are some of the most fun parts of a child's life for a parent. And he, for the last, 5 months, since February, he's not been able to even meet them once a month. He's not able to talk to his lawyers for more than, Aitor Martinez, his lawyer in the Spanish case, said Julian had to call him 10 times to have one 10-minute conversation because the line kept mysteriously getting cut off. The latest news, which is horrendously appalling, is that after a year of asking, Julian's finally received a computer. And guess what they've done? They glued the keys down.
Fucked up. It's so fucked up. I'm sorry, but Jesus Christ, man. Yeah, sure, you can have a computer. Oh, by the way, we glued all the keys down. What petty little bureaucrat is responsible for that? What fucking, this is someone who took a magnifying glass to ants every day of their life growing up. Burn smaller creatures because they got some sort of, I don't know, bump in personal power out of it. The depravity that has gone into the torture and ongoing persecution of Julian Assange for no other reason than heading a publishing outlet that embarrassed governments is insane to me. And the governments became embarrassed because their crimes were exposed, not because we're talking about intimate secrets between lovers, not because we're talking about what pet names you call your cat, but because people's lives were destroyed in every conceivable sense. And so you turn that destruction around on the person in the outlet that brought it to light, and people are fine with this, but they're not fine with the crimes coming out. That's how ass backwards the citizenry at large has become.
Well,
it gives me the angers. It does.
The Canary article that we have actually that you want to dive into, Steve, really outlines how powerful journalism is. Because essentially what the UK is trying to do, what committee is it?
Parliament's Intelligence and Security Committee.
The Parliament's Intelligence and Security Committee are essentially, and Steve will dig into the article, but trying to build the Espionage Act that's in the US and the UK while Julian Assange is being prosecuted. So do you want to read into that, Steve?
Yeah, let me pull that up, and then let me pull up YouTube real quick too to make sure that the things are jiving. So I got to thank Misty, our Tuesday co-host and all around badass, for calling my attention to this article. And yeah, let's just jump right into it. Parliament's Intelligence and Security Committee is recommending Boris Johnson's government bring forward I can read this morning, its proposed Espionage Act. The new laws will likely end up not much different from the sort of legislation that's currently being applied by the US against WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. The legislation would make it much harder for whistleblowers to reveal wrongdoings and would also criminalize journalists who publish leaks. Those who break the law could face up to 14 years of imprisonment if proposals from the Law Commission are adopted. The ISC report states in 2017, the Law Commission ran a consultation which considered options for updating the Official Secrets Acts and replacing them with a new Espionage Act. It goes on to add, it is very clear that the Official Secrets Act regime is not fit for purpose, and the longer this goes unrectified, the longer the intelligence community's hands are tied. Poor intelligence community. It is essential that there is a clear commitment to bring forward new legislation to replace it. This is ISC saying that spies and unaccountable intelligence agencies are being hamstrung by big bad journalists.
And what's really upsetting about this is, my local MP is, unfortunately for us, Keir Starmer, supposed leader of the Labour Party, my party. And it is shameful that he's come out and said he thinks the measures being used again in relation to Julian's extradition are proportionate or something to that effect. What's also really, really depressing is that he was presiding over the DPP when actually the decisions which were taken in terms of Paul Close writing to Marianne Ny in Sweden, telling her, don't you dare get cold feet, don't come and investigate him here. People like Paul Close and Marianne Ny need to be held to account. And I'm hoping that there will be, I know there is definitely a campaign in Scandinavia to hold Marianne Ny to account. I'm hoping that something similar will happen in Britain, because the CPS cannot abuse process in this way. You can't just abuse process, suddenly say you've lost all your files when the Freedom of Information request comes through. Oh, we've destroyed them. Oh, so sorry. And for the leader of the opposition to be somebody who was involved and implicated in this through, and Matt Kennard's done some wonderful work on Declassified, revealing Keir's meetings with various people. It is shameful that we're having a Workers' Party led by somebody like him. And, it is what is really depressing is that Boris Johnson will get no credible opposition from somebody who takes pride in the fact that he aligned himself with protecting those who killed, killed, tortured, maimed so many people.
Well, what I think it comes down to, and Steve, as he was reading through, reminded me of it, that it's really the predator class and the intelligence class versus the dissident class, the workers, and the poor, where you have these battle lines, and you see it just about how they're talking about wording this Espionage Act in the UK, where they say, oh, the poor, desperate intelligence community, how can they ever go around destabilizing countries and committing crime if their crime can be reported? That's a risk to our security. And that's as flagrant as the people that are like, oh, we have to censor the internet to save the children. While at the same time, the US government's responsible for about half of the child pornography on the internet, just by their sting operations that they put up. But the other thing I want to talk about too, because this is something I find super interesting, the way that the documents were destroyed when the Freedom of Information Acts were filed really reminds me, and I don't even expect you to know who this gentleman is, but there's a guy in Florida who ran for Congress named Tim Canova. And he put in a request to view his ballots after he lost to Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who was at the time the head of the Democratic Party when the DNC leaks came out. after a court battle, essentially the equivalent of a Freedom of Information Act request to view the public ballots, those documents got destroyed. And they said, oops, it happened by accident. It was nobody's fault. It was just part of the process of cleaning up our trail, essentially. And the way that in the US has just been swept under the rug, to where Democrats and Republicans both just completely ignore this federal crime that could put Debbie Wasserman Schultz, potentially Brenda Snipes, and everyone in that chain in jail for decades, is just ignored, while we're told to believe that there's this left-right paradigm of the people that care about the workers and about minorities versus the people that care about God and the whites. And you see it all fall apart when you look at an actual foundational issue like free press or prison slavery or all of these other little things. And I just hope that we reach a point collectively where we don't talk about ists, isms, and personalities, that we talk about what our foundational principles are and how nothing can come forward if we don't actually have the ability to have a discussion to figure out what's actually right and what's wrong.
That's why this is post-partisan. What we do, what like the one thing that we've consciously put into the minds of the people who watch this vigil is that we can't have a conversation about policy. We can't have a conversation about politics unless we've got primary source information that gives us a complete picture of how government works and how corporations work and how the lines that have traditionally defined nation states have been blurred over the last 50, 60, 100 years. So this is very much a foray into a post-partisan future. That we, like the 50 or 80 people watching right now, and us hosting, and the people like Deepa who are kind enough to come onto the vigils as guests, that we're trying to drag people into this realm of post-partisanship, albeit kicking, screaming, and with heavier arms than we have. But if propaganda is supposed to be a deterrent, it is failing miserably, at least in this space, and I think that is a cause for alarm and fear on the part of intelligence communities, on the part of their social media minders with blue checks next to their name. It has the same effect as shouting fire in a crowded theater, except for the theater's actually on fire and it needs to be shouted.
I think what's I don't know if you heard the it might have been a bit too early for you in the US, but at 3:00 this afternoon, our time, we had a session, webinar, as they call it, with Kristen Hafson, Nick Davies, and Claudia Weber, talking about, and Joe Glenton as well, talking about what's happening with Julian. And one of the things that Nick Davies said was quite interesting. He said, it is and I quote, "It's an intellectually corrupt, politically motivated misuse of the law to try to extradite Julian Assange." And he said that, and then he also talked about how, he was talking about how a group of young children was slaughtered by the US in Afghanistan. This today's thing was in the Afghan war logs, and the idea was that it was commemorating, I think it was 10 years since those war logs were released, etc. But later on in the debate, I asked a question about the D notices in the UK, because I'm really concerned that one of the reasons, and I don't doubt that one of the reasons the mainstream media doesn't touch the Assange case is not just because of some distaste for somebody who might have been tainted with sexual assault smears, but also because they're never, you know, when you say, oh, they're drawing the line and this is going to affect journalistic freedom, somebody said to me, well, it won't affect journalistic freedom because these guys were never going to cross that line anyway. Right? And I thought, yeah, that's true. But I did think, oh, maybe there's a D notice on, which is, and Nick Davies was explaining this. He was saying in his 40 years of journalism, he's never been affected by a D notice. But one of the things that I was trying to get across through the chat, which didn't get through, was that things changed after the Guardian computers were attacked. And when that was done, I think it really scared a lot of people. And thereafter, although D notices were advisory, it became very clear that even though they are advisory, if you were to overstep the line or overstep the mark, then you would be dealt with quite severely. And there's an interesting article that was written about how the Guardian's investigative journalists, especially in relation to war, were changed over time. And many of the good journalists were pushed out. So many of these people are sitting in the alternative media, and, you know, Kerry Ann, for example, is a great example. Mohammed El Mazi, who's often on your show, Tariq Haddad, Peter Oborne, he's a supposedly right-wing journalist, but he's the same with Patrick Coburn. So there's a lot, and of course the great Joe Lauria, you know, there are all these critical journalists out here. But on the other hand, what really strikes me, and I was talking about this to some people, is the number of alternative media journalists who are not engaging with this at all. So it's not just the mainstream media, but there is a silence within the alternative media. And that's why it's really important that this 50 or 80, I know it doesn't sound like a great number, but it's important because every word that then gets transmitted further on through these chains that we have with other people, it will change the world, and it has to change the world because we've had a poverty pandemic long before COVID hit us. And, you know, that poverty pandemic is causing a lot of other problems, whether they are, you know, those issues of social justice are exploding in different ways, whether it is with people being so distraught about Brexit here in Britain, whether it is people causing wars elsewhere. And after that poverty pandemic, we've had this COVID pandemic, and both the poverty pandemic and the COVID pandemic are being misused by the state, misused by employers to push through an agenda of austerity and surveillance. And I'm at a university, and my university is, you know, pushing through an online teaching kind of thing. And again, this is about extracting data from our students, making them pay, disempowering lecturers, disempowering teachers. And it is through these vigils and these conversations that we change that narrative, because the narrative has to be changed. And the elephant in the room, which is the criminality of these people, needs to be dealt with. I mean, you switch on the TV, you listen to the BBC, you listen to any of the big American channels, nobody's talking about that. And isn't that shameful? So please ring into your local radio station. Every time they have a show with a journalist, ask a question about Assange. Especially in the run-up to September. This is really important. Make people know. Write to your MP. Don't just write to your MP. Arrange a meeting. I don't know what the equivalent is in the US, but arrange to meet with them in their constituency surgeries. Talk to them about why you think it is important. And you might think, oh, I'm just one person who's going to listen. But if a lot of us do this, they are so desperate for our votes and our approval that they might just change, and it might save a man's life.
One of the things that I'm trying to make happen when we go to Washington, D.C. is meetings with Congress critters. And a friend of the Vigil and of my show, Eric Jackman, who has a wonderful show of his own with his brother, worked on Tulsi Gabbard's campaign. So I'm going to see if we can't leverage our friendship into a meeting with Tulsi Gabbard when we go to DC. I would love to be able to meet with some more confrontational or less sympathetic members of Congress, if for no other reason than to be able to hear the weasel words come out of their mouths as to why it's okay to torture and persecute a journalist for doing the job of journalism, you know. But I'm glad that you brought that up, because there's this pervasive feeling that one person can't do anything, even though the bulk of our propaganda and the majority of Hollywood movies are all about one person making a difference. You know, it's hilarious to me, but at the same time, we've actually had a content creator flat out tell us one person can't make a difference, so I'm not going to take the risk of the hit that is going to come to my channel by being on these vigils.
And that's actually, I wanted to talk a little bit about that, about the independent media, because we have a lot of friends in the independent media. We have a lot of people that have come on our show. We've gone on a lot of people's shows. So I don't mean this as a blanket statement. So I want to try to be as nuanced as I can. But there's a lot.
Save diplomacy for the diplomats, Andre.
Right. But so there's a lot of people within the independent media that absolutely refuse to mention the name Julian Assange, and for that matter, Chelsea Manning. And then trying to get people to even engage with a name like David McBride, for that matter, is even more impossible. And what it comes down to is a lot of what we see as independent media isn't independent, because independent media funds itself. Independent media is something where the people directly viewing it are the only source of revenue. And people like Jason Burmis are a wonderful shining example of this, where it's not about how much money they get from YouTube. It's not about if they have a Patreon. It's about if the correct information is being put forward. And coming in to doing these vigils, I had a lot of friends in the independent media. Like, there was a lot of people that I knew because I worked on political campaigns. I was an environmental activist when I first started this road to trying to change the world. And back during those things, I was getting great reception. I even managed to get a candidate interviewed on the primetime TYT program from the Green Party, which is like the everyone shits on them in the US political party. And then I transitioned into activism for Julian, because we were literally asked, people who are aware, to be his voice. And then a lot of doors closed with friends I had in the independent media and connections that I had made. And it's to the point where before this show, before you had joined us, Deepa, we were even talking about, like, is it even worth contacting these people anymore? Because we've asked so many times across so many levels, like, hey, we're trying to do this. And at first it was, well, maybe they just don't know who we are. We're just setting out. There's a lot of disinformation. There's a lot of fake journalist institutions out there, and people that'll stand up to just break a situation and a movement. But it's escalated to the point where we're like, can we even ask them, or is it worth asking them to even put a mention of Julian in their end credit on YouTube when they close a show out? Because chances are we're just going to get radio silence from them anyways. And is there a better 30 minutes that I could spend writing an email to people? So it's the independent media in the US has a lot going for it with a lot of individuals, but people are too dependent on YouTube revenue and stuff like that to even consider being a revolutionary voice, where to them supporting a CIA coup politician is their revolution, where they say, hey, well, this is as good as we're going to get as someone that's openly for destroying Venezuela and won't say a word about Julian, but they'll support Medicare for all, so we'll take them. And that's just heartbreaking to me.
Support
to see
Medicare for all in theory.
In theory.
In theory. For donations will support Medicare for all. But when it comes down to actually fighting for it, no, that's not what your Congress critter is going to do. And
I guess to
I've
the
had
larger point.
I was just having this conversation with Misty yesterday, because Misty has a show called Facts on the Ground that people should go subscribe to and check out when we're done here with the vigil this morning. And not just because I'm the most recent guest on it, but because it's a fantastic show, and she's talking about, her and Jesse Zerwell are talking about stuff that like nobody is touching. So it's phenomenal. But when the question of independent media gets brought up, like I get big mad real quick, because the way that we have monetized thought, the way that we have the way that most independent media functions, and I'll try to explain this really, really quick because I definitely want to hear Deepa's thoughts and about how this works in the UK. But the way that it seems to work here in the US is most content creators follow the model, that the business model of the Young Turks, who were only following the business model of the Daily Show, where you use a clip from mainstream media that forms the baseline material for your content. And you wag your finger at mainstream media, and then you immediately go to the next clip. And all you're doing is training your audience to react to you reacting to mainstream media. And that's it. Like, that's the entire show. And very rarely in independent media do you see content creators interview actual independent journalists. Very, very rarely does that happen. The format is, let's roll a clip, let's make fun of the clip, and let's uncritically move on to the next clip. And it's so frustrating. It is it's also the opposite of what I do on my own show, where if I find that I'm citing a particular independent journalist, I will do my damnedest to bring that person on the show and have them explain it, because I have questions, but I'm pretty thin on answers. I'm thick on opinions, thin on answers.
And so Deepa had mentioned and was talking about, not to pivot the conversation too far, but about online teaching and the shift in education. Personally, I think that it's literally going to enable the intelligence community from birth through when you take your job after college, whatever that may be, to intimately know what that person has been exposed to on an educational standpoint. And through the use of online platforms, you eliminate a lot of that person-to-person teaching experience. You eliminate that teacher that inspires that child. And for a lot of people that start out in activism, it's because they had a teacher that was honest with them. Personally, I had a teacher that was best friends with a guy that was shot and killed in the Kent State shootings. And so I think what's happening with this shift to online education models is it's just allowing the intelligence community to gauge the effectiveness and adjust the level of propaganda that they inundate society with. Because it's to the point now where most people don't even know what's being taught in high school history books, to where we spent a literal entire generation fighting to have people realize that 9/11 wasn't committed the way the media explained it to be. But that got lost in translation into the history books, into the next generation. So even having to go back and educate that previous generation about the truths that we discovered becomes a struggle.
So I guess Deepa's having some camera problems, but that's okay. We can even go to Brady Bunch, maybe. I don't know. And see if we can at least have something on screen for this. when she's talking. But yeah, Deepa, if you wanted to discuss the Elon Musk thing, I'm happy to do that. Because I've been trying to talk to people about Elon Musk for a number of years. I live in Central California. I live down the road from the Tesla plant. My good friend Ben Kalajian, his brother is a VP at Tesla now, and I've tried to have these conversations a number of times. I'll just share screen the tweet, and then we can discuss it. Here is.
Make sure you open the whole thread too, because the one tweet doesn't really capture it. You have to scroll up a little bit. There we go.
So, yeah, Elon Musk, another government stimulus package, is not in the best interests of the people. Not in the best interest of the people. Now, I kind of agree with that, but not for his reason. So let's discuss this a little bit.
I think you lost the tweet. Hold on.
I can go back one little. Yeah. So
there it is.
Blue Check Armani says, you know, it wasn't in the best interest of the people. The U.S. government organizing a coup against Evo Morales in Bolivia so you could obtain the lithium there. And Musk says, we will coup whoever we want, deal with it. Now, it could be argued that he was being tongue-in-cheek. It could be argued that he was trolling. But the reality of the situation is that Elon Musk is a direct product of the Boer Wars, whose family owns emerald mines, whose family's fortune is based solely off the exploitation and the blood of a native population that had no political voice whatsoever for centuries. Deepa, do you want to pick this up? Oh, you're muted.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you now.
Sorry about that. I had to log out and log back in. So I was actually highlighting that it takes a certain amount of self-confidence and arrogance even to put out a tweet like that at a time when people are really worried about oligarchs, and at a time when people are really worried about very rich people being able to do what they want. And that's exactly what he's saying. And that's exactly what is seen throughout the world. And that's exactly what is being demonstrated day in and day out in Julian's case. This arrogance, this belief that we will say we're doing this, we will drag him out of a sovereign embassy, we will buy him out of a sovereign embassy, we will park him in a maximum security prison, and then we will say he's going to be extradited for 175 years in Supermax, and you won't be able to do anything about it. And that's what this is about. This is about this inherent superiority complex that these people seem to have. And that really bothers me because, I guess to a certain extent, I think we need some form of revolution, off with their heads, because these kinds of people are destroyed. Off with their heads is a metaphorical term, by the way, before anybody thinks I'm suggesting any violence of any sort. No, what I'm saying is we need to topple the kind of structures that that allow a small number of people to have so much control over the rest of us. And if you think you want to take back control, whether you're somebody who voted for Brexit, whether you're somebody who voted for Trump in the US, whether you want to have control over your life. What Julian Assange's case is saying to you is that you cannot have control over your life. The people who are in positions of power will determine what will happen to you. And they disrespect you. They care two wits what you think. And if you don't stand up now, there is no point in pretending you're taking back control. In the UK, if you're somebody who votes for Brexit, you need to stand up, and you vote for Brexit because you believe we could take back control, then you need to stand up for Julian Assange, because essentially Britain is being a lackey to the US, a lackey to the American intelligence services in extraditing Julian, because there is no legitimate reason for Britain to spend vast amounts of money to surveil an individual within an embassy on suspicion of a sex crime. They don't do it for any of the other rape convictions. Only 4% of rape convictions in the UK are upheld. So they don't really care about sex crimes. They don't really care about anything else. They are just trying to follow the agenda of the American state. And if you think this is about taking back control, take back control in this way. Push back against your country, our country, becoming subservient to an imperialist America.
And in the US, we've had people push back, but it's been in such selected and pinpointed ways that it's hard to try to unite people together in conversation, to where you have people standing up against what is clearly and obviously an overt tyrannical police force here in the US that get insulted by the same people that take an armed storming of a Capitol building, because they are literally instituting laws that say people can't grow their own food. And so I think what it really comes down to is trying to find a way to have people realize that they're all fighting the same ghost, that everyone's so blinded by reading their book of socialism or their book about capitalism that as they reach their hand into the meat grinder of tyranny, they all explain it from a different perspective while it's killing them. And that's the part that drives me crazy, is because there's all this ideological talk out there, but no one's talking about totalitarianism, or so few are. And no one's talking about tyranny. Even the idea of like personal liberty and rugged individualism is propagandized and spun to mean different things for different people. But tyranny is tyranny, and a dictatorship is a dictatorship. Like, these are words that we all fundamentally understand. And it's time that we start referring to the governments around the world as the American dictatorship, because it's not a democracy. When you have the political theater that we have, it's hard to even say that small d democracy existed in the first place, because it's literally been the same thing, just not scrutinized as difficultly from people on the ground.
Or that there is a difference between Republicans and Democrats in any way. I think could I also come back to something we were talking about earlier, and talking about independent journalists who are actually making an effort. And could I acknowledge Margaret Prescott, who runs the show called I don't know how to pronounce it, Sojourner Truth, within KPFK 90.7 FM, I think it's called. And it's a public affairs program that airs Tuesday through Friday on KPFK radio. And she's made a real effort to pick up on Julian's case from time to time. So I want to acknowledge her. I want to acknowledge people like Joe Laria and Consortium News, who've been pushing on Julian and, saying things about him. I want to acknowledge people in the UK, people like Mohamed El Mazi, who report from court regularly, as does, and this, I'm just having a senior moment. Sorry, I can't remember the name of the Australian journalist. Would you be able to help me? The one who tweets regularly. Marty, that's the one. Sorry. People like Marty Silk, who are at least helping us hold power to account. And we need more citizen journalists, people like Joe Brack, who are going out and getting things recorded. And, they're not having shows which have millions of people viewing it. People like Gordon Dimmock, people like Ahmed Caballo, all these people, they've been making a real effort to, and Barnaby Naberka, these are all people whom I would encourage people to follow, at least on Twitter, because these are the people who are still trying to tell the truth and who are not being funded by any corporations. And also in the UK, I would urge you to follow Mark Curtis and Matt Kennard's Declassified, which is putting a lot of information about war crimes. Back to you, Andrew.
A couple of the other really good journalists or people that we've had on here quite a bit, you have that I recommend personally. People like Jason Burmis, people like Susie Dawson, but also going as far as like places like The Last American Vagabond and The Last Podcast on the Left, and so many of these other anti-war voices that exist out there. And it's just a matter of making sure that while they're telling the story of these war crimes that happened, that they mention, oh, and this was exposed by, and we found out about this because of WikiLeaks.
And that's also Elizabeth Voss. It's also Gloria. It's
I think Elizabeth is great.
Patrick Henningsen has been on the vigils before, and he does good work. Danny Sherson, who is one of the, I guess, most genuine anti-war voices that we have going for us right now, simply because he's a retired U.S. Army major who taught history at West Point. And by the way, he'll be back on the vigils here soon. I've been emailing with him basically since the last time he was on, and we just are kind of like email buddies now. But Danny's a really good sounding board for finding the pulse of what's going on in the current military and how people who are active duty at this moment feel about what they're being told to do, what they feel about their government, and what they think about the U.S. going forward. We need more, I guess, is where I'm going. Like we are we're very, very lucky, I guess, in that we've been able to reach out and connect with a number of, if not high profile journalists, the ones who are unafraid to print what the truth is. And that's something that we see fewer and fewer people doing every single day.
Can I also, could I make a plug here for people to support Craig Murray?
Oh, absolutely.
We have a man in court. Sorry, Andrew, you were going to say?
No, I was just going to say we have an article teed up from Consortium News, actually, because Craig Murray is going to Madrid to to testify in the case against UC Global about the surveillance on Julian Assange. Yeah. Craig Murray is someone who I respect very deeply. So in case people don't know, he is currently facing prosecution in the UK for doing wonderful, but ultimately in that case, pretty standard journalism. He was talking about a court case from a different angle, where there's laws in the UK that forbid you from breadcrumbing, essentially is the term, and that's providing colloquial statements intended to disclose someone's identity without necessarily identifying them by name. And apparently this is something that, according to the courts, Craig Murray did. In the actual indictment, beyond the fact that there was grammatical errors out the ass with it, that they literally were skipping numbers, like I believe it went from 49 to 51 when they were listing the charges against him. It specifically references, and this should be kind of disturbing, the reason that he's such a good journalist, it specifically references his work on Julian Assange. And that was something from the onset of his case that I found really, really disturbing, because he had the wonderful piece, I believe it was called The Man in the Glass Box. And then a preceding week of stories all about Julian's situation. And for them to reference Julian Assange's court case as to part of the reason why he's being prosecuted, I think is a really dark aspect of Craig's persecution that doesn't get covered enough.
Yeah, and what's interesting about Craig is Craig's one of the establishment, isn't he? He's somebody who was a British ambassador to Uzbekistan. He's a whistleblower himself who blew the whistle on war crimes in Uzbekistan and has been persecuted ever since. And the CIA is apparently obsessed with him, as a recent article in Consortium News showed. What's really interesting about Craig is that not only does he understand the legalities of what he's doing, what's going on, he's also able to express them in a way in which ordinary people can understand and relate to. And him and great people like John Pilger are the people we look up to tell us what's really going on in the world. And it is atrocious that somebody like Craig is being persecuted in this way. And he's got, what is really upsetting for me is that his membership of the trade union, the National Union of Journalists, has been progressively delayed. And he's somebody who's got over 90,000 followers. So if you're talking about journalists who's talking to people and whom people respect, and I think his blog has, is it 90,000, am I right? Close to 100,000 followers, something like that. And Craig really understands both the politics of it, but also what ordinary people want to know. And I think we've got to come back to the fundamental question is, what do you think a journalist is supposed to do with truthful information when he receives it? Should he hide it or should he disclose it? And should a journalist protect his sources? And if you look at either of these two questions, then the answer is, of course, a journalist should publish. And of course, he should protect the source. And that's where I would target all arguments, because irrespective of whether, people say, oh, well, Julian Assange might be unlikable, but as though they know him so well. I mean, it's amazing how even when they're supporting him, they slander him. And we've got
You're not wrong.
Sorry?
You're not wrong. It's this like backhanded swipe at Murray, where even when people are, and the same holds true for Julian Assange as well. Like when the indictment came out last year, mainstream media was quick to say, at least here in the States, they were quick to say, the Trump administration is acting really heavy-handed here, and the Trump administration is trying to criminalize journalism. But let me spend the next 5 minutes of my airtime assassinating the character of Julian Assange. And that's how they would frame all of this. And they're doing Craig Murray the exact same way. And if Julian is the canary in the coal mine, as it were, Craig Murray is, I guess, the first victim of lack of oxygen in the coal mine. It's and the ABC Australian broadcasting journalist who may be getting charges for publishing David McBride's story, or the now almost 700 journalists who have been arrested, shot at, tear gassed, and otherwise maligned covering the Black Lives Matter protests that have been going on here in the States. And people are still not drawing the connection that investigative journalism, the head of it is already on the chopping block. And go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. On these online calls, it's hard to know when somebody's finished a sentence, and I find that difficult in ordinary conversation, and online it gets worse. So I'm really sorry. one of the things I wanted to say when you said Black Lives Matter is that, there are a lot of protesters out on the street talking about Black Lives Matter, talking about historical oppression, and rightly and justly being angry about that and wanting to not just topple statues which are symbolic of that repression, but topple the structures, the institutional structures that hold us back. But what's really important, if you want to tackle inequality, if you want to tackle structurally embedded injustice, is that you recognize that the people in Iraq, the people in Afghanistan, the people in parts of the world where our troops are going in and killing people are also Black, the political definition of Black, right? Where their lives also matter. And if their lives matter, it isn't simply, somebody saying like Boris does, pickaninnies with watermelon smiles or using some other swear word about Black people or whatever else. It is about really their lives not mattering, them being shot down, mowed down, them being tortured in isolation, and that's not mattering. And if you think you believe in Black Lives Matter, you need to stand up for whistleblowers and for Assange. Because what Assange revealed, what Chelsea revealed, was that Black lives do not matter in Iraq and Afghanistan.
You're absolutely.
They are unpeople. Yeah, sorry.
No, you're absolutely right. And we've been, at least here on the vigils, we've been trying to hammer home the connection, not just of that, but if you're going out and standing in support of Black Lives Matter and you're dumb enough to take your phone with you, guess what? You're now on a list. Guess what? You are now potentially being tracked and surveilled as a result of your engagement in what is supposed to be a First Amendment protected right. We're the strategies implemented by both public and private security agencies, intelligence agencies, the ways by which activists are targeted. One of the reasons we know so much about this is because of Julian Assange and because of WikiLeaks. And it's got to become part of everyone's activism at this point. The success of your activism is incumbent upon your support of Julian Assange. It's really what we've been trying to hammer home since the end of May.
Can I also point out, could I highlight how Julian's being psychologically tortured? A lot of people say, oh, is he really being tortured? Isn't that what really happens? If someone's being surveilled, if you would, think about yourself. You're indoors right now during the lockdown. Think about Julian being in lockdown for over 10 years, not being able to communicate, not being able to see friends and family. In the Ecuadorian embassy, the maximum that he could walk was 10 to 15 meters in any direction. He's had huge amounts of sun deprivation because there was no natural light. He couldn't get to the windows because of the way he's had his conversations spied upon. He's had serious injuries, including a dental. I mean, when you have a toothache, you want to go to the dentist as soon as possible. He's had 8 years of being in an embassy where the British government denied him medical treatment. He's had a situation where he's had a shoulder injury that just won't get better because he's been denied medical treatment. Ecuador, once it grants citizenship, is not allowed to revoke citizenship. His citizenship was revoked. The arbitrariness of the way the process was carried out, judges making comments about him which are unrelated to the case, people smearing and slandering him, calling him a sex pest, when actually no charges were ever raised in Sweden. If at least the charges were raised, he'd be able to go to court and defend himself. But now no charges were raised. They were always in preliminary investigation stage. Imagine what that does to your head when everybody in the world, people whom you like, people whom you trust, people whom you respect, think you're a criminal. and then you're dragged out and put in a maximum security prison with rapists, murderers, killers, and treated in a way in which, you know, they mess with your brain, they mess with your head. He's being tortured even now, and to say that, oh yeah, we can get him some psychological treatment there in the prison, you cannot give someone treatment for torture while they continue to be tortured. Julian needs to be with his family and his children and his friends. He shouldn't be in a prison. Sorry, Andrew, over to you.
Oh, no, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I was going to say I can't remember the gentleman's, Victor, a journalist over in France, and he was talking with us about how we use language and that we shouldn't engage in the language of empire.
Is that Victor Dedage?
Yes, yeah.
And by referring to Julian's court case as a rendition, or as an extradition rather than a rendition, we're allowing that charade of this is a legal process to go on, because Julian is currently being tortured, and when he comes to the US, that's only going to increase. And a rendition, for people who aren't aware, is a political term referring to the transfer of a prisoner from one country to another to facilitate a greater method of torture under less law.
Via kidnapping,
via kidnapping. And that is what is happening to Julian. When he arrives here in the United States, he'll immediately be placed under what's called special administrative measures, which is something that we've talked about here. We spent, I believe, like 4 or 5 episodes going over it. But essentially what it is, as banal as it may sound, it allows for the United States government to, at any time, disconnect the conversations between a person and their attorney. They put reporting bars and conversation bars, like you're not even allowed to talk to your family members about the way that this inmate is being treated, your family member. There's no media access to this person. It literally places them in the darkest levels of the United States court system, to the point that they don't even have access to magazines and newspapers like a standard person does. They don't even get to understand the press of the outside world. And this is what will be happening if Julian is allowed to be brought here. And the fact that in the UK right now, because of COVID and because of the prison that he's in, like you had pointed out, he's under special administrative measures. He's only allowed to listen to so many different radio stations, and that's because they are government-approved propaganda arms that he can hear from them, but those channels aren't going to run stories about him. Those channels aren't going to try to make an effort to say, hey, this is what the public knows about your court case. So I just think that it's really, like in this moment, really critical to be able to break the radio silence, so to speak, about Julian's case, because he's being tortured in public daylight, but it's the fact that everyone's just not, or everyone's looking away. Oh, you're muted, Deepa.
Oh, so I just threw the, I'm not sure where Deepa went, but I just threw the link that she posted in our chat into my chat. We have...
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Ah, brilliant. Sorry, I had to log out and log in again. I was going to say, if you don't believe what's going to happen to Julian, just look at what happened to Chelsea. I mean, she was stripped, put under a light, in bright lights all through the day, not given any privacy, left alone. I mean, the amount of torture she suffered was just horrendous. And that's what they did to her. That's what they're going to do to Julian. Look at what they did around the world to people when you couldn't see what was going on. It is our duty to shine a light on their crimes. We need to go after them. We need to go after those who misuse their positions of power to do what they've done to Julian and Chelsea, to do what they've done to people in Iraq and Afghanistan, to do what they've done to people all around the world. We need to go after them. This isn't, we cannot stay quiet, because we're next. If you have children, If you have family, your children are next.
That's one of the
Uh,
things that we tried to scream through bullhorns and in front and at people in legacy or establishment media the last time that we were in Washington D.C. And that they were potentially next. If you look at the Afghan papers that the Washington Post released last year, it not only does it entirely validate everything that WikiLeaks had put out nearly 10 years prior, but it exposes the need for an organization like WikiLeaks because it took them 3 years of Freedom of Information Act lawsuits in order to obtain the information contained in the Afghan papers. Now, no one in independent media has the resources to fight Freedom of Information Act requests in court for 3 years. They spent, I believe, over $300,000 in this process. Like we don't have that. If you read or listen to interviews with Julian Assange where he's explained the primary purpose of WikiLeaks, that was simply to close the gap in the amount of time that it takes from whistleblowers coming forward to the public being able to access the information. And the process or processes that are involved from the time that a whistleblower comes forward to the time when an outlet like the Washington Post or the New York Times will report on these things are so involved and so ripe for being terminated, almost completely arbitrarily by world governments, that you have to have an organization like WikiLeaks. You have to have public disclosure outlets, which have now become criminalized in the United States per the National Defense Authorization Act. A public disclosure outlet is right there next to ISIS or Al Qaeda or Al Nusra in terms of terrorist organizations. Whistleblowers, hacktivists, leaktivists are being considered terrorists, and for nothing other than to keep the crimes of hostile governments secret. I don't know how to explain it any simpler than that. I don't know how to get somebody to wrap their heads around something that sounds so horrific but has become so mundane and ordinary in Western society. That, oh, of course we punish the people who bring forward information about the crimes our government commits. Of course we do. What are we supposed to do? Give them awards? Yes, you are. You're supposed to make sure that they're protected, and you're supposed to make sure that their children aren't suffering because their parents did the right fucking thing.
Well, I think the easiest way to ask it from a different angle to people, just to make them think like within themselves, is asking them what their point of standing up is. Like what has to happen for you to become outraged enough to fight back? And a lot of times people will just say, I don't know, or nothing, or fight back against what, or what for. So it's strange how every person has their own trigger, essentially, that leads them to understand that we live under global authoritarianism. But with that said, I want to thank you very much for joining us, Deepa. You have been a wonderful guest yet again.
Thank you.
Please let people know some final thoughts and where they can find you.
Sure. You can find me on Twitter at @Deepa_Driver. And Andrew, I'd be grateful if you could write that down. I'm a British academic. I teach financial regulation and corporate governance, so nothing directly to do with Julian Assange. And I'm a citizen activist like you, very angry at the way in which the law has been subverted in order to undermine ordinary people, and very angry at the way in which an individual has been collectively targeted by 5 rogue states: Britain, America, Australia, Sweden, and Ecuador. In terms of final thoughts, I'd like to remind you of the event tomorrow at 1 o'clock. Please join us. It's always, I guess as other activists know, it's really hard to set up these events and organize them if you don't have other people telling you what's going well and what isn't going well. So please join us, tell us, talk to us, ask us questions, and please talk to your friends, your neighbors, your children, your acquaintances about what's happening with Julian. Put around flyers, tie the yellow ribbons of trees. You know, you're not defacing any property, you're not doing anything illegal. And ask for Julian Assange to be freed. He deserves to be free because he is a human being just like you and me, and he shouldn't be tortured in this way. And thank you, Steve and Andrew. It's been lovely to chat to you, and you make it so easy to talk. So thanks for having me, and I hope I'll see you all another time. Bye.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for joining us.
Bye-bye.
So we have a question in chat that we kind of answered talking about special administrative measures, but I want to toss it over to you, Steve, just for you to give a good answer to. How can extradition be worse than Belmarsh?
So, all right, look at it this way. If because Julian is currently on lockdown 23 and a half hours a day, and is only allowed like the tiniest of privileges, like being able to walk in the yard for a half an hour, or being able to have the occasional medical appointment, being able to listen to any one of 3 channels on the radio. Those things are happening. He's allowed to call his family. His family is allowed to talk about whether or not they've spoken with him. His legal team is allowed to talk about whether or not they've spoken to him. When the special administrative measures kicks in, all of that goes away. Not only is there zero transparency to what will be done to him, there's zero accountability for what will be done to him. The isolation that he currently experiences at 23 and a half hours a day will be supplemented with methods of provable torture, like sensory deprivation or sensory overload. What Deepa was describing, where Chelsea was forced to stand naked in a room with incredibly bright light and incredibly loud music, we know that this is torture. This is also part of the process under special administrative measures. The gag orders that will be placed on his family and on his legal team are such that Julian Assange would effectively be removed from history, removed from real time as well. If you look at what is being done to him in the Guantanamo Bay of the United Kingdom and you feed it steroids, that is what he will be subjected to under special administrative measures. And remember that these charges carry a 175-year sentence. This is effectively a death sentence. So Julian would be, in as many ways as possible, tortured to death for as long as that takes. And then when it's done, the US government will move on to the next journalist or the next publisher and carry out these measures all over again, just so they can continue to commit crimes against humanity, repercussion free. I hope that was satisfactory.
Yeah. I don't even know really how to follow that up with anything. It's just, yeah, that's basically the future.
Kick a fucking chair over and be like, God damn it!
Right.
Why? Yeah.
So before we do talk about the most wanted list, I did want to bring up the article real quick about Craig Murray, because that is super important to talk about. Because Craig Murray is going to Madrid, like we had mentioned, to testify in the UC Global case about private intelligence and intelligence community's actions in general targeting people. So if we can get that, Josh has already got it up on the screen. Do you want to break that down real quick, Steve?
Yeah, for sure. And I've read this article like 4 times now, just because the even though Joe Lauria wrote it, the hand of Ray McGovern is all over it, and I'm going to admit a I don't know, extreme isn't the right word, but an incredible fondness for Ray McGovern at this point. I've become I don't know, man. I don't know what the right word is. I'm very grateful that Ray McGovern is. I live in a even as dumb as this timeline is. This is the stupidest of all possible timelines. But even still, the fact that we're in this timeline with Ray McGovern makes it almost bearable. So
I have the same feelings about Guy Fieri, if you know who that is. It's crazy that guy can be alive at the same time as me.
Anywho, go into the article, the former British ambassador to Uzbekistan and a close associate of imprisoned WikiLeaks publisher Julian Assange says he was the top target of the 24/7 surveillance of Assange at Ecuador's embassy in London by the Spanish security company UC Global, which, according to press reports and court documents, shared the surveillance with the CIA. Craig Murray said he's been contacted by an attorney in the spying case on Assange and that he will be going to Madrid to testify. The founder of UC Global, David Morales, was arrested over the surveillance, including privileged Assange lawyer conversations, and is on trial. Now imagine that. Wrap your head around that for a second. The actual president of the company that did the horrific illegal shit was arrested for it. That's almost an anomaly in this day and age. Murray told former CIA analyst Ray McGovern in an email shared with Consortium News that with Murray's permission, that the CIA was obsessed with him. Murray told McGovern that he'd offered to give evidence to Special Counsel Robert Mueller, who spent $32 million in more than 2 years investigating an alleged conspiracy between the Russian government and the Trump campaign, including how WikiLeaks obtained emails from the DNC and Hillary Clinton campaign chairman John Podesta. Mueller concluded that there was no evidence of a conspiracy between Moscow and Trump, but maintained Russian agents hacked the emails and delivered them to WikiLeaks for publication. Murray has said that different persons with legal access to the DNC and Podesta emails were WikiLeaks sources. I wrote to Mueller, quote, offering to give evidence, never received any reply. Murray wrote to McGovern on Wednesday. Never had any request for an interview by any U.S. authorities. Murray then wrote, but I received a message from the lawyer in the case in Madrid about the spying on Assange in the embassy, contracted by the CIA, which said that I was the top target for contractors, and the evidence shows they were obsessed with me. I shall be going to Madrid to give evidence. Murray added, just why the U.S. security services declined my offer of free evidence, yet were obsessed with spying on me, is an interesting question. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, but it's also roundly disturbing.
And I'm just glad someone like Craig actually gets to go and actually break this down like this, because the fact that it's allowed to go this far is just atrocious.
No, I absolutely agree. I do. Hang on just a moment. I gotta mute here real quick.
Okay. But the last piece we have to break down here is it's an Electronic Frontier Foundation article about the WikiLeaks Most Wanted list. And we have a few different sections that we're going to go over here, just inside of it, if we can get those pulled up. But just to kind of recap and give a little breakdown about what this is about. The conspiracy to commit computer intrusion charges that Julian Assange is facing were expanded. And what that means is they're essentially having to change the story about what these charges are and how they work. And they're taking the conspiracy to commit computer intrusion charges and pivoting it to the situation surrounding Sabu and Siggy and all of the FBI informants that were inside of WikiLeaks. And working alongside trying to essentially bring down the organization. But the Most Wanted list is mentioned 16 times throughout the entire indictment. And it's one of those things that it's really critical because it was also mentioned in the Chelsea Manning, when the indictment was specifically outlining about Chelsea Manning too. And the Most Wanted leaks show that hold on, I just was checking to make sure we were on the right slide. The Most Wanted leaks page shows that the visible edit link, similar to what you might find on any other Wikipedia page. The language is one that can be securely and anonymously adding your nomination by directly editing the page. WikiLeaks, like it shows there, had actually requested that people put up what they would like to see and listed in the Most Wanted leaks. So that way, it was almost a collaboration of people on the ground witnessing crimes, saying, hey, this would be something that would be good to report to WikiLeaks itself. It wasn't WikiLeaks writing out a list saying, please send this to us. It was people affected in these situations that knew about this organization that were putting up these asks or these requests, or maybe people from the human rights community that knew what was going on and had the ability to put this information out there.
Sorry, I was checking out the live chat there for a minute. There's a whole side conversation going on that I'm glad I'm not participating in. So this, yeah, I mean, this is absolutely insane because the way that the Most Wanted leaks appear in this superseding indictment. Which, by the way, we're going to find out what role the superseding indictment plays in the overall prosecution tomorrow during the case management hearing. They're supposed to be addressing it. If you'll recall, the superseding indictment itself was not delivered to Julian's legal team or the concierge for the U.S. State Department, Magistrate Vanessa Baratzer, but was in fact released only to the U.S. media, which brings up a whole bunch of ancillary questions like, do they even plan to use this? Was this anything more than a further attempt to assassinate the character of Julian Assange? What the fuck is the FBI doing? Using a convicted pedophile, a convicted pedophile, a convicted embezzler, a notorious con man, and certified sociopath as a star witness. Why the hell aren't there anyone in media besides us talking about this? Lots of questions arise. But in terms of the Most Wanted list, it's fucking ridiculous because it was already public. Like Andrew just said, it was curated or designed to be curated by the people who were viewing the site, not the people who were maintaining or hosting the site. This is audience participation at its finest. And in terms of who people wanted to see some light shown on. I'm just this whole thing with this superseding indictment has me pretty heated, man. I'm very interested to see what Julian's legal team has to say about this tomorrow or Monday. I keep on thinking today's Sunday for some reason. I don't even know why. I know I'm under caffeinated. I think I mentioned that like twice during the vigil today.
So there's just one more part on this that I really want to touch on specifically, and it's on the second slide, but our slides were kind of stretching weird up on the screen. And it's, while today it's in the government's interest to paint WikiLeaks as a rogue band of hackers directed by Assange, the most wanted list page epitomes one of the most important features of WikiLeaks. That as a publisher, it serves the public interest. WikiLeaks served activists, human rights defenders, scholars, reformers, journalists, and other members of the public. With the most wanted leak page, it gave the public a platform to speak anonymously about documents they believe would further public understanding. It's astonishing and thoughtful, and a democratic way for the public to educate and communicate their priorities to potential whistleblowers, those in power, and other members of the public. So I think that, again, that is one of the core themes throughout this whole computer fraud charge. And so I think it's just really important to continually drive home the fact that what WikiLeaks did was run a public institution. They ran what I think should be the mirror for all international organizations, where they weren't trying to hold power and make demands. They were trying to reveal to the public through a semi-engaging process what their governments and what other governments around the world were doing. And it even goes as far as like just the Milton report that got literally just a chemical report that showed a corporation was just dumping chemicals wherever the hell they wanted. It got gagged throughout the entire UK media. And WikiLeaks was the one publication that put that forward. They were the one that said, well, we're actually going to publish this even though it's under a journalistic ban, because you can't put journalistic bans on things. If an institution is willing to say, okay, well, I'm not going to report this because the government said so, they're not a journalistic institution to begin with.
There's a moment in our newest teach-in, which I don't even think we've mentioned at this point.
I've thought about mentioning it like 3 times, and Daniel brought it up in the chat twice, but we didn't really get a chance to squeeze it in.
But there's a moment where Julian is speaking to the nature of censorship. And he said, I'm paraphrasing, so if I butcher it, I apologize. The odds of me matching the eloquence of Julian Assange are pretty fucking thin on the ground. But he says censorship has encoded in it a secret process, because if there was no need to keep the process secret, it wouldn't be censored. And it makes me so just, the world is infinitely worse off without Julian Assange being able to fulfill 100% of the duties that the role of publisher of WikiLeaks demands. Not that Christian Ramsden isn't doing an excellent job. He is. But I feel like leaks would be more frequent. Trust in the overall organization would be higher were Julian still to head the outlet. And I think that I've even heard Christian Ramsden remark that in his own right. So that's not me being like snide or anything. I appreciate that that Christian has been taking up the helm and putting his own life on the line every single day that he maintains the title publisher of WikiLeaks. That is that's an extraordinary show of courage. It is. But the nature of people and the nature of publishing organizations seem to almost live and die based on who's at the helm. The one exception to that I can point to immediately is Consortium News. What Joe Lauria has been able to do and the integrity that he's been able to keep at this outlet that Robert Perry, swore by and codified into the way that they operate is incredibly commendable. If we don't have any questions, we may as well wrap.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's all our articles. We actually got to clear out our article queue today.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
We mentioned it a couple times, but just I think it's worth saying again, Julian's court trial is on Monday, July 27th. As I say that wrong, I apologize. And that is where they're going to be breaking down this new indictment. So most likely on Tuesday, we will have talked with Mohammed Almazi and gotten reports out of court about what was going on there. So we'll cover that next week. Who is our guest next Tuesday, Steve?
Next Tuesday, we are going to be joined by activist, singer, songwriter, musician David Rovics, and I am very, very stoked for that. And I should give a huge shout out and my gratitude to our friend Ron Placone, who put me in touch with David to arrange this interview. Saturday, a week from today, we will be joined by Stefania Maruzzi, which is just phenomenal. I feel like we scored on that one. And then Danny Sherson wants to come back, so I'm gonna try and get him scheduled for, I think, maybe next Tuesday. I would really like to see a panel discussion with us, Danny, and Kevin Gastola. I think that would be fun.
I was going to say that would be fun to pull Christian on too, because he always makes for a good guest / host at the same time. I love having him on.
And I wish the audience did. God damn it, Krish Mohan's fucking great, dude. Y'all need to tune in when he's on.
He does, if you like Krish, he does a very deep, educational, provocative, humor-filled stand-up most Fridays. Just to give him a plug, because I think he does awesome work there. But my name is Andrew Smith. You can find me on Twitter at Andrew Zigmund, Zigmund. You can find us on actionforassange.com and on Twitter at action_4Assange. We look forward to seeing everybody in DC for the second round of Julian's trials. And we hope that you can help us share that link around. And a special thank you to Deepa for joining us. It's always great to have her on. And tomorrow morning, there will be a live stream that she is putting out with a bunch of great headliners. So please take a look at that as well.
My name is Steve Poikinen. I host a show called Slow News Day. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find it by typing in Slow News Day Podcast into your search bar. Please subscribe to that. There's no guarantee you'll get notified. But I am also on the Rockfin and D Live. I would like to expand to a couple more platforms, but that's in the offing. I am going to be joined on Sunday, tomorrow, by our own Misty Winston and Jesse Zerwell, who do have a show called Facts on the Ground that you should also be subscribed to. And yeah, I would like to thank Deepa and Sleepy Josh on the ones and twos, and my co-host Andrew. To you guys in the chat watching, we absolutely love you, and you make all of this, if not possible, certainly bearable. It's a funky old world that we live in, and it's a better place with you guys in it. If you can, please do donate to that GoFundMe. If you can't, please share the link. And we will see you Tuesday with David Rovics. Good luck to us all.